Hello, friends. Welcome back to another session of interview questions on Spring Boot. In last session, we are done with the Spring related questions. So in this session, we will discuss Spring Boot related questions. So let me present my screen, and I will get started. Hmm, let me try. I think getting some issue. Yeah, I'm able to press it. Okay. So the very first question, what is Spring Boot? In last session we have discussed about Spring, what is Spring, why to use Spring, what are the features of Spring. Now what is Spring Boot actually? If Spring is a one framework, then is Spring Boot is a framework? No. Spring Boot is not a framework. Spring Boot is a Spring framework tool, you can say. Spring Boot is a Spring framework tool that can be used to build Spring application fastly and easily with auto and minimum configurations or no configurations. Automatically, Spring Boot is adding the configuration. You have to decide what type of applications you want to develop. Whether you want to develop a standalone application, Spring Boot will do the needful configuration automatically. If you want to develop Spring web application, Spring Boot will do the uh, needful configuration for that one. If you want to use Spring in Spring application JDBC, Spring will do auto configuration for that one. Just you have to tell. How will you tell? We will see that one. Okay, so that is the meaning of Spring Boot. Okay, so you can say simply say Spring Boot is a Spring framework tool that is used to create the Spring Boot application fastly and easily with auto or minimal configuration or no configuration. Spring Boot is also used to develop microservices application with Spring framework. Yeah, you can develop any kind of application using Spring Boot. Okay, so why to use Spring Boot? Why to use Spring Boot? Used to develop any kind of application such as Java standalone application, web application, Java enterprise application, microservices application very fastly with no configuration, with very minimum configurations or with auto configuration, so that we can or developer can focus only on the business functionality rather than wasting times in configurations and any other architecture related changes. Instead of doing that one, developer just have to focus on the business core logic. Other configuration will done by the Spring Boot. Okay, so there are some of the features of Spring if it's Spring Boot framework actually, it should be Spring Boot actually. So what are the features of Spring Boot framework? Not a Spring framework. The question is has to be corrected actually. I will do it. So what are the features of Spring Boot framework? So there are some of the features that is you need to know to give the answer properly. Why to use Spring framework? What is the difference between Spring framework? Okay, so the features, the very important is the features. So first feature is opinionated. Spring Boot is opinionated. How it is opinionated? It makes opinion on the basis of POM dependency, or you can say that Maven dependency. Whatever the Maven dependency you are using, on the basis of dependency, Spring framework deciding what type of application you want to develop. See, if suppose if you have added MySQL dependency, then definitely you are creating a database connection. For to doing the database connection, what you need? What you need? You need to have a JDBC template, or you need to create a JPA repository. You have to do all these things. For that one, what you need to do? You need to configure username, password, your database URL and all configuration you need to have. So Spring will ask you, please configure this also. And once you configure the details in properties file, Spring will automatically create the data source or JDBC template or repository, like repository you will tell it will create. So that is the meaning of opinionated. Suppose if you have added Spring Web related dependency, Spring Web related web jar, Spring Web MVC jar you have added. It means what? It means you have to you will configure dispatches of let. It will configure automatically. You don't need to worry at all. Suppose if you have added Spring Boot starter, it means actuator will be added. If you have added some a Spring Data JPA, it will automatically start. If you have added theme leaf, configure the theme leaves. So like that, all the configuration it will do on the basis of dependency. That is meaning of opinionated. Customizable, yes. Default settings you can customize. Some of the default settings it will come by default. If you want to customize those, you can customize them using application.yaml file or application.properties file. Okay. And third feature, Spring Boot comes with lot of starter. Every dependencies you have to add on the basis of starter, like Spring Boot Web Starter, Spring Boot JDBC Starter, Spring Boot JPA Starter, Spring Boot Security Starter, Spring Boot AMQP Starter, Theme Leaf Starter, Tomcat Starter, Actuator Starter, Cloud Starter. Lot more are there, but the basics I have given. Whatever is the mostly used in the applications we have given here. Lot more are there. Suppose if you have added security starter, consider you have added security starter. What it will do? Spring Boot will automatically protect all the endpoints. Whatever the endpoints you have created in your web application, all will be protected. One default login page also will be created. Default login page will be created, and it your Spring Boot will create one default user with username as a username, and password will be printing in the console. You have to take that password and you have to use it. So that is the beauty of Spring Boot. With auto configuration it is coming. You can customize the default password, username, password you can customize. But it is not the practice like you have to place a username password in the XML file. No, you have to place in database somewhere that you can customize that also using user detail services or something. So that is a starter. Spring Boot has provided so many starters to do the auto configuration. Okay, auto configuration like Spring Boot application will do auto configuration on the basis of starter. It will create the beans and all. Spring Boot initializer is there. Like you can create application from the starter.spring.io very fastly. You can create, even you don't need to install any plugins in your system and all. You don't need to do. Spring Boot initializer will start the will help you to create the project. And starter will have a Spring Boot starter will have one main class. You can say Spring Boot initializer class or something, and that will be marked with at the rate Spring Boot application. Okay, it has an embedded Tomcat. Suppose if you are developing web application, then web application where you will run. You have to run that web application in some container. That can be a Tomcat or Wildfly or any other. You have to run on that. By default, it is coming with one embedded Tomcat server. You can run it in your application. Actuator Spring Boot provide production ready features. Sorry, production ready features like suppose you want to check the health of your application. How will you do? How will you do it? To checking the health, what is the name of application, what is the version of the application, other matrices, other health related details you want to get. You want to configure some tools so that you can easily monitor your application. For that, to monitoring your application, you must have some endpoints. So all that endpoints will be provided by Actuator. Production ready feature. Spring Boot admin. What is Spring Boot admin? It also provides Spring Boot admin. So Spring Boot admin is nothing but it's a server where your application will be registered and you can monitor your application. Yeah, what is the help? Suppose where you will use your actuator. Definitely that actuator will be used in some of the server so that they can get the health of your application, the status of your application, monitor your applications, how many requests is coming, something like that. So that who will do some server. So Spring Boot admin will be one server. It will check how many applications instances are running. All those information will be in Boot admin server. Okay. It also support YAML file. It's a very good support for YAML also. You instead of default properties, you can use Spring.yaml file. It's up to your choice. Okay, YAML file. So what is the difference between YAML and properties? Both are both you can use. It's not like some of them have a limitation, some of them have advantages, but difference is there. Like application properties use key value pair configuration, but application.yaml file use hierarchical configuration. This has a less readability actually. Application properties has a less readability. It has a more readability. Supports only string types. Application.property supports only string type. It supports multiple types of data. Use dot for key separation. Use indentation for key separation. That's the issue. That is the difference between application and properties YAML file. Okay, what is Spring Boot main class? The main class of a Spring Boot initializer, the Spring application and start the application. This class should be marked with at the rate Spring Boot application. Spring Boot class also called Spring Boot initializer. Spring Boot initializer, yes. So Spring Boot main class is nothing but a class that will start your application and that will be marked with at the rate Spring Boot application. And this is also called Spring Boot initializer. Fine. What is the Spring Boot application annotation? What is the use of Spring Boot application annotation? Actually, the Spring Boot application annotation is the combination of at the rate configuration, at the rate component scan, and at the rate enable auto configuration. These three you have to mark: component scan, auto configuration. These three annotations you have to write. Instead of that one, you can write single annotation at the rate Spring Boot application. These three it will do automatically. It will scan the component from the base package. Automatically it will configure the beans. Automatically it will make the default class as a configuration. You can define the beans in that class also. Okay, you can say that Spring Boot application annotation is equal to at the rate configuration plus at the rate enable auto configuration at the rate component scan. Okay, configuration means what at the rate configuration annotation does. This annotation tag A class as a configuration class. This annotation is equivalent to defining the beans in XML configuration. See, no one is using XML configuration now, but still some other old applications might be using. But instead of that one, you can go with the Java configuration, and that class has to be marked with @ configuration, where you will define all the beans. We have seen this in thoroughly in our code. @ configuration class is used to create the beans. Whatever the classes in that one, we have created bean with @ bean annotation. That will be that class will be marked with the configuration. Enable auto scan means @enable auto scan annotation auto configure all bean based on the class path dependency. For example, since you have included Spring Core dependency in your class path, Spring Boot starter, Spring auto configuration assume that you are creating a core applications and set up the core Spring accordingly. It will do component scan, like you have to scan the scan the beans to be created from the class from the packages. So this annotation scan the base package and create beans for the other annotated Java component like components, configuration, and services. This is equivalent to a Spring XML tag. This is component scan. Okay. What is data JPA? Data JPA is another you can say that another module of Spring. Data JPA is a Spring module that will focus that is used to do the database SQL data or a relational database operation. You can say that Spring Data JPA is a Spring module that is used to do the relational database operation using Hibernate as a default ORM tool. It most compiling feature of the application to create a repository implementing automatically. It run from the repository interface. So the very compiling feature or beautiful feature of Spring Data JPA is you just have to define the interface. Implementation will given by the Spring by default. Spring Data JPA module will give the implementation. Okay. What is the starter of Data JPA? Spring Boot starter. Spring Boot starter Data JPA. Okay. What are the JPA annotations for entity classes? So for some of the classes are there for entity classes like @entity used for declaring any POJO classes. Uh, an entity for database like this is entity classes to mark that one. Table. If you want to map the table with the Java class, then you have to use @table annotation used to change the table default details such as the attribute, something name, schema, catalogs. Okay, ID means for primary key. If you want to make any primary key, this is the primary key will be mapped to this one. So used for declaring a primary key inside our POJO class. Okay, generated value like Hibernate automatically generate the values for sequence or something like that. Okay. @column, define the column. Yeah, this is a column definitions you want to give. It is used to specify the column mapping. It means that if in a case we do not need name of the column, then we declare a POJO, but we need to refer the entity. You can, okay, it's like here as a name, length, unique, some of the label, some of the constraint it has. You can give. Transient means you don't want to map the column. You can use transient. Otherwise, by default, also it will be mapped. If it is marked with the entity, Hibernate will understand. Yeah, this is the entity. Just please mark it. Name, type, everything it will take from the class itself. Because type also will have string. Yeah, it is a where are. If it is a string, it means it's a where it's a you can say that it's where are sorry characters. If it is an integer, then it is a number, something like that. It will automatically understand. But if you don't want to map it, you can use transient. Temporal for date format. Format the date for the storing in the database. Temporal. large object, large any binary object you want to use, you can use it. Order by, you want to order like date or name, you want to order something, order by fast name ascending, you can use like that. ASC ascending, like order, this will be in ascending order, always it will be in ascending order. Okay, next. Used for one or more mapping, one to one mapping, one to many mapping, you want to do one to many, many to one, many to many, you want to do mapping. Join column in case of mapping is there, so other columns, other table columns you have to join. What is the reference column? This is the reference column. What is the column name in that one? So all you have to tell in the join column. Okay. How to create a JPA repository in Spring Data JPA by extending the JPA repository. Simple. Just you have to extend the JPA repository interface into interface as following. See, public interface, user repository, extend JPA repository, user string. This is the end model entity class, you can say. This is your entity class. And the second one is the type of primary key. What is the primary key? Primary key type, string, integer, whatever, you have to give that here. That's it. Now the basic default current operation will be provided. You don't need to worry about anything now. Current operation like save, get, delete, all the operation, all the method will be there. Okay. Who will provide the implementation for our interface? You will provide? No. We no need to provide any implementation. Automatically your implementation will be provided by Spring Data JPA. Okay. What is Spring Boot profile? Suppose sometime you have to work with your code has to be deployed on different environment. For development environment will be different, testing environment will be different, production environment will be different. You have to test your applications. So for different environment, configuration will be different. For development, configuration is different. For testing, configuration is different. For production, configuration is different. Then how will you differentiate the configurations? The configuration you can differentiate using profiles. Spring profile. You have to create a profile. Okay. How to enable Spring Boot profile? Suppose Spring Boot profile active. Which profile you want to development? And how the file will be. See, currently application dot properties file name is like that, application dot properties. Then if you created a dev profile, how it will be? Application underscore dev dot properties, and application hyphen, sorry, not underscore, application hyphen test testing dot properties or YAML, whatever you are using, production, product, prod, something like that. Okay, name whatever you want to use. Fine. Testing, production, full name you can use, but generally it's a product recommended practice is just use just use some of the what you say, short form you can use. Okay. So I think that much is there only for Spring. Next, Spring microservices we will discuss in the next session. These many questions so far I have figured out. Might be some more questions will be there. If some more question will come for Spring Boot related, we will add here and we will discuss that also. Thank you and have a nice day.